What do you think the UFO phenomenon is?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, that there are a lot of different varieties of it. But when we look at, like we were looking at the Francis of Assisi and the kind of historical things and the abductions and things like that, I think that it's been around for a long time, and that these are things that are in communication with us. So I used what I do in my book, both the books that I wrote about this, is I talk to people who I think represent thousands of people. So each person in the book represents thousands, if not more, maybe many thousands of people who have had experiences and the ways in which they interpret them. So all of the people seem to have had experiences where now what they want to do is they actually want to work for justice in different ways. Like Jose, the veteran in my book, he's working with young people and helping them deal with being addicted to social media and things like that, and helping them get through life, which is really hard right now. And that's what he's doing. And then you look at Dr. Whiteley, right? So she's working in the Space Force. She's trying to, help people deal with the fact that they're seeing things that, that could down planes and things like that. And she's helping people talk about that. She's helping people. Each person is somehow doing what I'm suggesting that I think is an out, this kind of structural injustice that we see. So I think that this is a transformational thing without the drugs, is what's going on. Like some kind of massive experience that people are having.
Stay tuned. I just wanted to quickly let you know that at the end of this video, I'm going to touch upon some deeply intriguing things pertaining to this topic. All right, let's get back to it.
So I think that this is a transformational thing without the drugs, is what's going on. Like some kind of massive experience that people are having, and now it's getting out, and people are being able to talk to each other through Reddit communities and, different types of social media. So it is, we did see, religions when they become viral at one point. We've never seen it in an age where we have digital technology, but this is what we're seeing now.
What do you think the physical objects are?
Well, okay, so this is something that's very interesting. We just looked at the Shroud of Turin. I believe that there are these, I would call them, and this is just my own non-scientific term, interdimensional objects. They're objects that have characteristics of our dimension and some other dimension.
So some other dimension has the capability, or something from some other dimension has the capability of transporting a physical object into our realm.
Or even imprinting onto a physical object. Yeah.
How so?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think
What
that's
do you mean by, what does that mean, imprinting onto
So
a
with the
physical
Shroud
object?
of Turin,
Okay.
we see the imprint of, the image, and
If it's real.
yeah, if it's real. But it's an anomalous object. So we do have, from Gary Nolan, engineered objects that we don't know how they're engineered, but they definitely look like they're, it's off planet. I would call the kinds of things that we see in the historical record interdimensional types of things. Now, how? I don't know, Joe. Okay, so I just don't know. But I do think that scientists in the government know that these things exist, and they would like to figure it out. And so part of disclosure, the disclosure movement, is outsourcing this and trying to get as many people as possible to help in figuring it out.
What do you think when they use the term donations? What do you think the purpose of that is? If there is an object that is purposely released into our, like I'm sure you're aware of cargo cults, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So with cargo cults, for people that don't know, there's been some islands during World War I and World War II where planes landed there and they left. And these people, they created these statues of these planes, and they worshiped them, and they wanted them to come back. Yes,
because they got food and all kinds of wonderful things from the planes.
Right, and
they thought of them as deities.
Right, the same way we would think of something from
like
somewhere
this.
else.
Yeah. So that in my field, has been called the cargo cult, the UFO cargo cult, right? And obviously, Tyler and James view these parts as donate. They called it the donation site, right? So giving it the idea
Is that just one theory?
Yeah, that's just one theory.
Are there other theories that there's a biological organism that encounters a lightning storm and it actually crashes and there's physical bodies?
Oh yeah,
that
there is that. Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Going
What's your
around.
take on that? Because that's one of the things that Grush talked about and some of the other people talked about, that there are biological things that have been recovered.
Well, what impressed me about what he said was that he used the term biologics. And I actually know that term because that's the same term that Tyler was talking about when he was creating materials in anti-gravity spaces on space shuttles and such. So I was wondering, because David Grush does get his information from people allegedly in the programs, but he's never seen these materials that I know of.
I think he has some firsthand experience that he was not able to talk about.
Okay.
That he's alluding to.
Okay.
I think, but this is recent, and
Mm-hmm.
he's been very careful about how he releases this information and what he's able to release and not able to release. And
Right.
that I was like, okay,
Yeah.
really?
So I mean, I've not seen any bodies, nor have I seen intact craft, but I also have had, now remember, I don't have a clearance like he has, so I can actually talk about what people have told me. I have had people tell me that, yes, Diana, there are intact craft. I don't know. I mean, maybe. So, I don't know, Joe.
Do you, when they talk about inventions that emerged post-Roswell, that's one of the points of speculation, is that we have back-engineered something and that this led to the creation of fiber optics and a lot of other technologies that seem to emerge after that time.
Yeah. So this question was prominent in my mind in 2012 when I met Jacques Vallée. So I was already aware of his work, even as a person who hadn't studied UFOs or even believed in them. Jacques Vallée is just one of these people, right, that you come across his work and he's fascinating. So I thought it was strange that not only was he a person who was, pre-engineered ARPANET, right? He was on ARPANET, which is pre-internet. He was creating that at the same time as being obsessed with UFOs and being a ufologist. These things seemed that they had to be together, right? There was something that, what's going on here? So, and I'm in touch with him often. And he says a lot of things that are rather cryptic, but sometimes I ask him specifically, was what you were doing on ARPANET related to back-engineered UFO parts? And then he'd say something like, there are many secrets in Silicon Valley, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's real cryptic. He's kind of difficult to have a conversation with publicly.
Well, it does have a lot. I guess there are lots of secrets in Silicon Valley.
Of course.
Which is where he lives.
Yeah. Another thing that was really fascinating about your book was you were talking about how much religion he studied.
Yes. That was really interesting. So in the book, what I do is I uncover not just him, but Alan Hynek. They were friends. And they were both Rosicrucians, which is a form of, he might not like me to say this, but it's a form of mystical Christianity in a sense. But a lot of Rosicrucians don't view their roots as Christian. They look at it as Egyptian. But it's an esoteric tradition, and it involves meditation. I think it most likely involves this thing that you and I have been discussing in the whole talk so far is the pineal gland thing, the access point, because both of them believe in this kind of life, this meditating and things like that. And so I included references. Everything I say in my books, by the way, I pass to the person that I'm writing the chapter about. So everything that I said about Jacques, I gave it to him beforehand, and I said, are you okay with me saying this publicly? And so it passed all the tests. And I also talk about going to his apartment and seeing his library, which is an amazing library. And he has stained glass from Chartres Cathedral. And Chartres Cathedral is a special place for Rosicrucians, like a special place of presence of the sacred. So, and he actually did those himself. So he learned how to do stained glass from people at Chartres, by the way. And yeah, just amazing. And he had a lot of books on angels and fallen angels in that library, like almost like it was almost like going into the Vatican archive, going into this place, because these looked like first editions or close. So, really, really old books about this topic.
Fallen angel.
Yeah. I was pretty shocked when I went. We were going to have lunch and talk about the crash site and maybe talk about, what I learned from Tyler and that kind of thing. And we went to lunch, and then he said, "Do you want to see the library?" And I was like, "Yes, of course." So I saw the handwritten documents from Project Blue Book. And that was just going into the library. That wasn't actually in the library. Then when we got in there, I noticed big bookcases of these books. And of course I was drawn to them. And he said, he picked out one and he opened it and it was about angels. And he said, this is a book about angels. And I could see that. And I was looking at it. I was like, wow. And then I looked at the other bookshelf, and that bookshelf was just as impressive. And then it was about fallen angels. He said, "Oh, this one's about fallen angels." And then he made a joke and he said, "You can't have one without the other." And I thought that was really interesting.
That does seem to align with what we're talking about, with like the struggle of good and evil.
It does. That's what he said too. And I was actually shocked at that point. I was like, wow. So just, I'm a professor of religion, so I'm like, I'm right about, my intuition was somehow confirmed.
And by the way, I think this should be, I'm not sure if this is totally true, but I believe he was the inspiration for the French character in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think so.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting conversation. Many things come to mind for what these unidentifiable objects could be. Now, Joe and his guest mentioned a project called Project Blue Book, and this was a project investigating UFOs starting in March of 1952. A researcher who was partnered with this Project Blue Book, who goes by the name of J. Allen Hynek, he speaks about different kinds of encounters that people can have. That being encounters of the first kind, which look like an individual being within 500 feet of this UFO phenomenon. Encounters of the second kind, which has to do with the individual and the UFO phenomenon having some sort of communication. Encounters of the third kind, the individual has actual physical contact with this UFO phenomenon. Referring to Hugh Ross's work, he's an astrophysicist, and he mentions a very famous encounter that an individual had where they were put into a trance, and they were given information from this UFO encounter about origins, history, and the destiny of humanity. And with this information, they wrote a book, and the name of this book is Urantia, where in its 400 pages, 1/3 of its contents takes the time denying the deity of Christ. These interdimensional beings, they strongly, in this case, oppose and wish to pervert the origins of Christianity. Now, what else is connected to some of these UFO encounters is that of occult activity. Dr. Hugh Ross, he explains that these UFO encounters, they differ across the world. He explains these encounters as being much higher in France and equatorial Brazil than that of the United States. He explains there are many people in equatorial Brazil than in the United States that are involved in occult practices. There's a direct correlation with the percent of population involved in occult activity and of those having these UFO encounters. Which is interesting, as Joe Rogan and his guests speak of this library within the residency of Jacques Vallée, who is a pioneer, computer scientist, astronomer, and ufologist. This man is an important figure within the realm of UFO studies, and we see his deep interest in angels and fallen angels and the studies of religion. At the age of 16, Jacques Vallée and his mother saw a disc in the sky that they believed to be a UFO, and his residency was also in France, where this occult activity was prevalent, which probably led him into studying religious practice. Now, yes, some specific things with these encounters can be explained by naturalistic explanations, which should be expected because you have what seems to be immaterial coming into contact with material. but also understand there are some things pertaining to these events that can be deeper understood when the spiritual or immaterial explanation is considered. Even logically answering some of these specificities, naturalistic explanations cannot. It is important to understand the weight, the authority of the accumulative case for Christianity, and how this authoritative foundation allows us to interpret evidence that does not conflict with science or what we know about logic. So with the authority of the accumulative case for Christianity behind me, I say at the end of the day, this is a spiritual battle going on, and the devil will do everything he can to hide behind naturalistic explanations. Understand, those who adhere to naturalistic explanations alone, I am not calling you the devil. What I'm saying is your eyes have been blinded by some facts that only the Christian accumulative case can explain, and very often does a better job of explaining logically some answers to some problems that we see and debate about as it relates to the atheist debating the Christian. Now, one of the things leading back to the explanation of these UFO events can be understood through a theistic perspective and a Christian perspective. Because what we see is an objective truth in science that the universe began to exist, meaning space, time, and matter began to exist, which logically means it couldn't have created itself if it began to exist. So this logically implies that something spaceless, timeless, and immaterial did the creating, that being something spiritual, outside of this physical realm, which leads us to believing in theism. And the historical authority of Jesus Christ leads us into believing his credibility to explaining this realm of angels and demons. I would like to quote a passage from the New Testament, and it's found in Colossians 1, verses 15 through 16. And this is speaking of Jesus. It says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him." Another passage that I would like to quote in the New Testament, speaking of this authority outside of this realm that is in opposition to the good spirit, that being the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus Christ. This is found in Ephesians 2, verses 1 through 3. And it says, "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh, and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath." So there is a spirit in opposition to the creator of the universe, that being the ruler of the air, the influence of the ways and desires of this fallen world that are hostile to the objective morality of Jesus Christ. This verse shows even Christians must be humble in their approach of evangelizing, as it says about us believers, in which you used to live when you followed this world, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Speaking of Satan, the ruler of the air, we all have fallen victim to the deceit of Satan, and those who have been pulled out are to be humble and gentle in their approach to reaching those that are yet to be saved. And also to explain the context of the ruler of the air, that's talking about the spiritual environment that is taking place within dispensation to dispensation as it relates to the morality that a society is following outside of the plan of God. Now the last verse that I'll quote, it comes from 2 Corinthians 4:4. And it says, "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." So in closing, I'd just like to bring up something that Joe Rogan said in his video again that we just watched as it relates to this UFO evidence and how it points to the struggle of good and evil. So what we see, there is a spiritual blinding, a spiritual influence in opposition to the deity of Christ, just as we have seen within the pages of Urantia, as well as other philosophies of life, encouraged and influenced by demons. I would like to encourage whoever sees this to look a little bit deeper into the roots of Christianity, and I pray that you come to a saving knowledge of the one who made you.